Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. I am so pumped you're here today because we're diving into what's honestly one of the most fascinating social and psychological experiments ever done in the wild. Picture this. You take 100 totally different people, split them into two completely opposite groups, and just drop them in the middle of a forest. We're talking about a massive, high-stakes survival experiment that literally tests the absolute limits of human endurance, teamwork, and, frankly, sanity. So, the whole premise hinges on this one wild question. What actually happens when you pit 50 hardcore survival experts against 50 complete amateurs? The setup is just totally unbalanced right from the jump. On one side, you've got folks who literally do this for fun, people who brag about spending months off the grid. And on the other, people who think roughing it means a bad Wi-Fi connection, literally asking if anybody packed snacks. And here's the kicker. There's a massive $250,000 prize hanging over their heads. 250 grand. The rules are brutally simple, really. Whichever team has the most people left standing when help finally arrives gets to split that huge pile of cash. The only way out before the end? Lighting a rescue flare, tapping out, and kissing that grand prize goodbye. Okay, let's dive into part one. Amateurs versus survival experts, and the initial imbalance. To really wrap our heads around how this whole thing unfolds, we gotta look at how these groups prepped. It is absolutely hilarious. The blue team, our experts, showed up with decades of honed skills. They packed super practically for any harsh climate, mostly because they had no idea where they were going. Their immediate game plan? Gather resources and build robust debris shelters. The red team, though? The amateurs were basically given a shopping spree beforehand. They rolled up, dragging these massive tarps, tiny, brightly colored kids' pop-up tents, and literal 24 packs of bottled water. They were banking completely on store-bought luxuries instead of, actual survival knowledge. But check out this incredibly ironic twist in those first few days. Day one hits and the arrogant experts decide to rough it just a little too hard. They slept directly on the wet, freezing ground. And guess what? Two of them actually lit their flares and tapped out immediately. Meanwhile, on day two, the amateurs slept like babies, all cozy in their sleeping bags and little pop-up tents. It wasn't until day three that the experts finally got their act together enough to build these massive, super-insulated debris shelters, which they affectionately dubbed the Airbnbs, just to get a decent night's sleep. Moving on to part two, egos and the food crisis, and the unraveling of the experts. Once the shelters were somewhat sorted, the lack of food became the absolute biggest hurdle, fundamentally changing the dynamic at camp. Listen to this quote, "I just want a Waffle House buffet." It perfectly captures the mood for the amateurs. They blew through their store-bought party mix in like 2 days. By day 4, the harsh reality of the woods hit them like a freight train. They were totally depleted, dealing with pounding headaches, and just dreaming out loud about milkshakes and endless buffets. And the food strategies between the two camps, literally night and day. The blue team experts flexed their knowledge, foraging for edible plants, setting up river fish traps, and digging up these hidden food caches of beets and potatoes scattered around the forest. And the red team? Well, their fishing attempts basically just caught trash. They were forced to survive on practically nothing, eventually boiling down to a brutal, desperate system of rationing just a single apple a day per person. Now, what's really interesting here is that despite having all the food, the experts, these type A personalities, essentially caused their own camp to implode. Imagine 50 self-proclaimed alpha survivalists all trying to be the boss. It led to some genuinely insane behavior. We're talking people hiding secret stashes of potatoes from their own teammates in sheds, bitter, drawn-out arguments over wiping down makeshift kitchen counters. You even had leaders actively trying to withhold food from members they decided were less worthy. It was wild. This quote from one of the experts really hits the nail on the head. "I find it really difficult to be a part of a team. I'm naturally oppositionally defiant. Technical wilderness skills mean absolutely nothing if you can't get out of your own way." Because of all this intense clashing and just a total inability to compromise, the blue team shockingly lost 9 people by day 5. Their camp was just tearing itself apart from the inside, proving pretty quickly that survival isn't just about starting friction fires. It's about social cohesion. That brings us to part 3, the power of community and shared suffering. So let's look back at the red team for a second. If they couldn't forage and they couldn't build, how on earth were they surviving? Well, the secret sauce was their community pantry. This was a centralized system where every tiny bit of their limited food was pooled together and rationed out equally. And that relies on absolute 100% trust and teamwork. So while the experts were out there hoarding secret potatoes from each other, the amateurs were actually using their shared misery to bond their camp closer together. Now, don't get me wrong, it was not smooth sailing. They had a dedicated camp chef who, tragically, served up some truly awful, stomach-churning meals out of those tiny rations. But despite the terrible food and the constant gnawing hunger, the red team stepped up. When people tapped out, somebody else jumped right into their role. They split the chores, they checked in on each other mentally, and they kept morale afloat. They proved that a supportive community can sometimes completely outlast pure technical skill.
All right, part 4, Mr. Beast's psychological warfare, testing willpower.
Of course, no extreme survival setup is complete without some external pressure designed to push these exhausted, starving people right to the brink. Enter the utterly cruel 50-can challenge. Imagine you haven't had a real meal in over a week, right? Suddenly, you are handed 50 cans of beef, corn, and peas. But here's the catch. You have to resist opening them for 72 agonizing hours. Whichever team returns the most unopened cans wins a massive reward. And if they tie, nobody gets a single thing. And the total number of rewards handed out? 0. Yep, in this crazy twist of sheer willpower and intense paranoia, both the starving amateurs and the starving experts perfectly tied by returning all 50 cans totally unopened. They literally stared at ready-to-eat beef for 3 straight days and didn't touch a drop, mostly because they were so terrified the other team was doing the exact same thing. The aftermath of that perfect tie was just devastating. Both teams got absolutely nothing for their huge sacrifice. But for the red team amateurs, who were clinging to this desperate hope for a hot meal, it was a psychological blow they just couldn't shake. Morale shattered. The very second the result was announced, 5 amateurs lit their flares and eliminated themselves. Boom, 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 right in a row. It was an absolute gut punch. So the mind games clearly took a massive toll. But what happens when the environment itself decides to turn against them? Literally, right as they were trying to recover from the can challenge, the sky just goes black and a relentless 5-hour rainstorm hammers both camps. The physical realities here were brutal. The blue team experts retreated into their Airbnb Beast debris shelters, which actually worked. They blocked the wind and insulated them from the freezing rain. The red team, though, total chaos. Their fire pits completely flooded out, and those cheap store-bought tents leaked everywhere, leaving them shivering in freezing temperatures with soaked clothes and shoes. The storm forced eliminations from both sides, proving that at the end of the day, Mother Nature really is the ultimate equalizer. Let's move to part 5 and see how this all builds to the Day 14 box challenge, the ultimate test of spite. So we're on day 14 now. Everyone left is freezing, starving, and totally exhausted when the host drops the box challenge on them. It's basically a classic prisoner's dilemma. 5 boxes are brought out. One opens up, revealing a premium survival item. The first team to slam their buzzer gets to take it back to camp. But if one team takes it, the other team gets absolutely nothing. Now, if both teams agree to pass, the next box is revealed. If they pass on all of them, theoretically, they both get the whole shebang. And wow, does this ever brilliantly illustrate just how unbelievably stubborn human beings can be? Just think about how this played out. Fishing gear? Both passed. Heavy cast iron pots for cooking? Both passed. Building supplies to fix their soaking wet shelters? Passed. They rejected every single item, not because they didn't desperately need them, but purely out of spite. They were just too terrified that hitting the button might somehow give the other team an unseen advantage later down the road. And believe me, it was not easy. When they opened the box loaded with huge piles of peanut butter cups and milk chocolate, you could literally hear the agonizing cries from the contestants. Staring at rich, calorie-dense chocolate after 2 weeks of literal starvation and forcing yourself to pass on it just so the other guys wouldn't win, I mean, the sheer willpower that takes is just mind-boggling. It was exactly like one contestant shouted. It was just cruel. As we wrap up this explainer, it really leaves us with a profound takeaway. We basically just watched a real-world tortoise and the hare social experiment unfold. Technical skills are obviously vital, sure, but so is emotional intelligence and the ability to work together without letting your ego tear the camp apart. So I'll leave you with this. If you were in a high-stakes survival scenario, would you rather be stranded with a group of highly skilled, bickering isolationists or a supportive, tightly knit community of resilient amateurs? Think about it. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.